A pleasure to meet all at last, and today it is January 31st. So, basically, we're already through 1 month of the year here. And I will say, we've had a bit of a challenge so far. And it's pretty much what's to expect because there's going to be a lot of snow, there's going to be a lot of cold, and there's sometimes going to be a bit of sickness here and there. And I can't say that I have managed to avoid any of these factors, but at the end of the day, these things are only minor infractions. But what I've come back here to say is that I actually am in the process of clearing out my house from a lot of these old Christmas decorations, in which I might just have my old spot back. Basically, the little corner near the window in which I have some good natural light. In a similar regard, we of course have this. But because we are expected to get a good amount of cold, I figured I might as well go back to that other spot. Even though this place has been holding up pretty good because of the new insulation work that they put up in order to at least warm it up, it's still nowhere near as warm as it is inside. But I figured one last film should seal the deal. And I'll probably take a break just so I can finalize things and get everything organized. But until then, why don't we focus on a special anthology film? It pays tribute to the late great Rod Serling and his well-known thriller series, The Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone movie was released in 1983, a mere 8 years after the death of Rod Serling himself. And if you hadn't already known by now, the show had ran from 1959 to 1964, and even in spite of this mass success that the series generated, Serling himself was certainly not immortalized from anything out there, so he died at only a mere 51 years old in 1975. So, kind of young by today's standards when you think about it, but after 8 years had passed, John Landis and Steven Spielberg would come around, especially with their success in films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I talked about before, and I also talked a lot about E.T. the Extraterrestrial from 1982, the year before. And as we know, there was another popular film from 82 that I have managed to talk about pretty recently, John Carpenter's The Thing. But the Twilight Zone movie actually does things a bit differently than most. It does pay a lot of tribute and loyalty to the original show, picking 4 specific episodes. The first segment of which stars Vic Morrow as a man whom is incredibly racist. And if you hadn't already guessed by now, this episode in particular allows this racist man to be transported back to a certain point in history in which that it was common for Jews, Poles, Gypsies, etc. to be captured by Nazis. And there was also a point in which that he encounters members of the Ku Klux Klan whom are out to hunt him down in the city. It turns out that this is just a few hallucinations that he has after he binge drinks at the bar. And basically, for some time, he's a crazy man, experiencing a lot of fear and panic as he is eventually taken away. This kind of insanity is just insane. But we only just got started here, because Vic Morrow does a pretty good job at playing the guy named Bill, whom was rather racist, and just knowing the fact that change had come around and helped this man thankfully realize the error of his ways, just the fact that what the show had managed to accomplish, the movie does in a much more unique way, mainly because of it having a higher production value as opposed to what the show did. Sometimes more can be accomplished with less, though, as despite not having very much money in order to put most episodes together, Serling was able to put in a good amount of material. As we move on to the second segment, though, we do encounter many more familiar faces. One of the faces that I recognize really well, Scatman Crothers. And this was a few years after his entry in the film from 1980 known as The Shining, one of Stanley Kubrick's unique horror films of the 80s. But what does Scatman Crothers serve? Well, he, along with a few other members of the cast of his own age, in this segment, it pays tribute to the episode in which that a retirement home filled with old folk come together and relive their lives as young kids. But it's basically just a point of imagination and a good reckoning to eventually realize that they're only as old as they feel. It's another unique life lesson that the Twilight Zone show, as well as this movie, does give to us. But I find it incredibly heartwarming in the movie's instance because it's Scatman Crothers. And this was, let's remind ourselves, the last few years of his life before his death in 1986. That was just the same time when Transformers Season 3 came around. And the movie, which came out around the same year, it was one of the last things that he did. So, again, his closing years were pretty big in terms of his acting and whatnot. But anyways, though, we get to move on to our third segment, in which that the episode in question revolves around a teacher whom is invited to a home by a young boy. A boy whom unfortunately has some sort of television-related connection. There's a lot of cartoons playing on it, and he and the rest of his family are practically hypnotized by the movies and on-screens that are going on within the house. The teacher herself, not exactly in the ways of understanding what's going on. It's that sort of surreal moments that you might get from some other points in the Twilight Zone series, but nevertheless, you really gotta think about the fact that these episodes of the Twilight Zone film were especially picked because they had a lot of potential to being put together in a unique thriller movie from 1983. And because the same year was already well played with other films of the same genre and similar ones, it's probably no wonder why the Twilight Zone movie didn't exactly hit up all the marks as it did. In fact, some of the ratings on this were a bit on the average side. But we're technically still not done yet, because we have a fourth and final segment that basically relives through one final plot line of one other episode in the series. Another well-known pick from the Twilight Zone is a man whom is afraid of flying in planes. Basically, aerophobic, in a way. But we basically spend a good amount of time suffering with him as the plane seemingly goes into a lot of turbulence, people turn into creatures, and he starts experiencing all kinds of crazy delirium like you'd never think before. I mean, seriously, when I watched this movie, I was out on the beach in North Carolina. No joke. I was marathoning through a lot of movies during that time, and in fact, I'll probably start talking a bit about some of them right here in this series. But I'll get to some of the others soon enough. Anyways, though, the end of the film revolves around the man being taken away in an ambulance, and the ambulance driver just happens to be, you guessed it, Dan Aykroyd. And this was a year before Ghostbusters came out, mind you that. And there was also another man with him, John Lithgow. And if you haven't already known by now, there was an opening prologue that took place before the first segment of the film took place, which was centered on the Racist Man episode. There was actually a point in which that these two guys were driving behind the wheel on the highway and encountered something crazy on the road. Yeah, this opening prologue, complete with this unique way to end the film, with Lithgow and Aykroyd both coming together in the form of a cavalcade to help rescue the crew and passengers of this somewhat doomed airliner. Well, I'd say it's a good way to revolve back around to not only the fact that these two actors were there from the beginning, but also we eventually do get ourselves a unique reprise of the narration that took place at the end of each Twilight Zone episode. While Rod Serling explains the unique, mysterious phenomenons of the universe itself that all revolved around each plotline and storyboard that each episode focused on. The movie, though, gave us something similar, but again, the production value really shines in this part. It's like they not only rebooted the franchise, but tried to give out a new generation of Twilight Zone for a whole new generation of people out there. Considering it was well in the 80s, thriller was kind of being superseded by slashers. I mean, think about it. 1983, we were already well into the days of Halloween and Friday the 13th, and only a year before Nightmare on Elm Street would begin. So, again, because of a lot of these factors that correlated to a somewhat flooded market full of horror, thriller, bloodshed, action, and gunfights, and etc., you really got to think of the fact that Twilight Zone, the movie, I know it wasn't a perfect way to adapt the franchise, but it did take 4 episodes of the show and make them all into unique bits revolving around the storyline. Because one common theme that we see circulating around all the episodes, and even Rod Serling can tell us, life is a mystery. You never know what could hit you the next day. And while this is not something he technically quoted, I can imagine he would. At only 51 years old, though, you, again, really got to understand the fact that this was a man who, he probably could have seen a project like this come to life. But, most importantly, I do like this film. I like how it adapted 4 different episodes and made them all a little more elaborate just so they can all fit into a full-length, feature-length film. And on top of that, having highly acclaimed actors at the time, I mean, you had Scatman Crothers, you had Vic Morrow, you had Dan Aykroyd and John Lithgow, just to name a few. And there's plenty of others I could go around mentioning here as well. But I'm not exactly here for that sort of trope. At the end of the day, Twilight Zone the movie is definitely worth a watch. Even only once, that's probably fine and all that. So for my final scoring of this film, 8.0 out of 10.1. And I feel like that wraps up for the month of January. And I will be taking a bit of a break again for about a week. Not only because I want to get that other space cleared up and ready to make some more episodes for this series, but if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Then make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side. And of course, I'll have many more films worth talking about for the entirety of this season.